apart from what it is, right? Apart from that pet food wala thing. See, pedigree is essentially a record of descent of an animal or of a human. Okay, so this is in sync with what Vinod had said vis-a-vis that it is family history. Okay, it is basically recorded ancestry. Okay, recorded lineage. Okay, a person of nice, a strong pedigree. Okay, something like that, right? So somebody comes from a lineage, strong scientific pedigree. Okay, so what does that mean? Probably parents are doctors, engineers, teachers, and so on and so forth. So you get the picture, right? So it talks about that, but essentially within science, it is about your a record of descent of a person or ancestry. Okay, but I want you to remember it as GIP. Okay, genetic inheritance patterns. Just remember it as this. Okay, just write it down there in the beginning itself. GIP. Okay, so genetic inheritance patterns. Genetic inheritance patterns. Okay, the most important thing. See, I see. I think I remember seeing pedigree for the very first time, or sometime now, when I had gotten a dog. So when you got a dog, right? So you basically get like 16, not 16, like four generations, I believe. Okay, which has a whole bunch of grandparents and granduncles and all that. So you essentially get like four generations ke pehle, who were all the dogs, what were the name of it, and what kind of medals they had gotten in these like these dog shows and so on and so forth. If it's a dog of a particular breed type. But then you also have the street dogs, in and around, right? So you see street dogs like every part of the country, right? So you'll have sometimes they call them feral dogs, some they call as Indian pariah dog. Okay, but today we call them indie. Indie is a politically correct word, INDIE, right? And there is a strong culture or strong sort of a movement to sort of like promote adoption of our pet, of our indie dogs, or these dogs as our pets also, right? So in fact, they tend to be like much stronger, and I'll tell you why. So also, when I say stronger, it doesn't mean in terms of size, but in terms of immunity, in terms of they basically have a wider sort of a gene pool, I believe, right? Okay, so and so on. We'll talk about this, right? I remember, I had taken a couple of dogs. They were maybe like less than 6 months. We took it to a vet, okay, from nearby park, and it didn't look like they were able to sort of survive. So we took it to a vet, and the vet basically said, "See, this one basically has 20% chance of survival. Okay, if you can give all of these things and get them to take this and all these vaccinations and blah blah blah. Okay, whereas the other guy, I don't think he's going to. He's not even able to stand, so I don't think he's going to make it. Okay." And then he basically said, "Ki, so you get the picture, right? So that was that. Okay, but both of them actually sort of made it. Okay, and they are healthy and happy, and they're great dogs, right? So at that particular time, I remember speaking with him, and he said, "Ki, if it was normal sort of a breed dog, like your golden retriever, your Labrador, your German shepherds, na, it would have never made it." Okay, it is because these dogs basically have a little more sort of immunity. But anyway, these are all the context within pedigree. Okay, so you understood this. So pedigree chart is basically a diagram, okay, that shows the occurrence and appearance of certain phenotypes. Now, many of you know what is a phenotype and what is the difference with the genotype, correct? Phenotype is what? Phenotype is, please tell me now, put in the chat window, what is phenotype and what is genotype. So this basically, you should be able to see the phenotypes, but you are trying to analyze the genotype for it, okay, for a particular sort of a human, for a particular sort of a organism, for a particular sort of any sort of organisms with its ancestors, right? For a few generations of ancestors. Generally, when we draw pedigree charts, we're going to have at least three generations, okay? Minimum three generations you would want to have in your chart. That is that. Okay, so what is pedigree? We've discussed. Okay, we have to take a look at what are pedigree symbols, then how to draw a pedigree chart, and how do you sort of analyze a pedigree chart. Okay, so there are four steps here. So what is a pedigree? You understand. What are pedigree symbols? Then pedigree charts, and then pedigree analysis. I'm using these sort of written things in class itself, because again, this is an express batch, so that you don't have to wait on me to write, okay, within the class, because that's going to be slow. So what do you see here? Okay, so this is slightly, well, it's a different sort of a diagram, but net the symbols are relatively the same, right? So I've given you symbols that you can use in your pedigree chart. It's in your handout also, right? So what is this? So a male is basically what you can sort of like show a male as a square box. When it is a female, you basically show it as a circle. So instead of writing a male or a female, what do you basically show? You basically have a square and a circle to sort of represent this in a chart. Second thing, what is the difference between this and this? Okay, so if you see this and this, you start noticing one thing. Okay, there is unaffected. If a person is unaffected, by any sort of if the person is not carrying a particular trait, the person is not expressing a particular phenotype, then you leave it as blank inside. Whereas if the person is affected, let's say we're talking about a particular genetic disorder, and if the persons have genetic disorders, what do? Male affected, shade it in. Female affected, shade it in, and so on. Now let us say that you have this half shaded. Okay, in yours you basically see as heterozygous male and heterozygous female. In both of those things on the left hand side, if you can just note down, write down recessive, recessive. On the side, please note it down as recessive. It is for recessive. Okay, what this means is that let us say you have a combination or a genotype capital D lowercase d. Okay, you have a genotype that is capital D lowercase d. If you have a capital D lowercase d, it basically means, and let us say D is the problem wala allele for a particular disorder, for a particular trait. These contain this lowercase d is basically what this is saying, but it is still unaffected, right? It is not expressing that particular trait because this is recessive, and capital E denotes dominant. Now, similarly, you have what? This is like the person is no more, okay, deceased, okay, and you have this, okay. Whenever you have this arrow, okay, there are a few terms that is used here in social anthropology. We basically call it the ego. Here, we basically call it the proband, or propositus or index case, right? So essentially, this is the person we are starting with, and from here we are basically trying to utilize the genetic history of the family and trying to sort of trace the genetic inheritance pattern. What is genetic inheritance pattern? That is your pedigree, genetic inheritance pattern, GIP. Okay, and that is that. Similarly, now this is basically when I talk about like a recessive allele, right? So it is going to be something like this. Now let's say there is a female, and let's say we have a combination that is something like this: capital X and small x. Okay, where small x is the problem wala x. This is essentially the 23rd pair, right? So if you guys remember, there is a cell. Within the cell, we have the nucleus. Within the nucleus, we have 22 plus one pair, right? So the first 22 are similar type, and the 23rd is slightly different because sex determination, presence of X, 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 Y, this kind of combination. यहाँ पे let us say you have an X and an X, meaning it's a female. But however, one X contains some sort of a problem wala thing, okay, whereas the other X does not, okay. And if it is a recessive kind of an issue, then we denote the carrier slightly differently. It is going to be a dot here, okay, a circle with a dot. Okay, so this is something I'm sort of highlighting it right now itself. Okay, sometimes it's called as a carrier, a female. Okay, you just write it down. Okay, it is a recessive allele in a X-linked chromosome, or you can write it as X-linked recessive allele. Okay, just note it down: X-linked recessive, X-linked recessive. X is your X chromosome, correct? X is X-linked chromosome. Okay, similarly, you have certain other kind of symbols. Okay, for instance, let us say this is basically what links. Okay, so marriage has taken place. Okay, so sometimes it need not be marriage. It basically means mating. Okay, so it means mating. In your handout, it would have said mating. Okay, second thing here. Okay, so if you have double. Okay, so double lines here, it essentially means what? It is a consanguineous sort of mating. Okay, it's a consanguineous sort of mating. Now, you have not heard of the term consanguineous, so let me tell you what is consanguineous. See, generally in most societies, consanguineous marriages are something that will not take place. Okay, consanguineous basically means marriage between relatives. Okay, marriage between relatives. Okay, in fact, even within North Indian Hindu families, okay, some of you are North Indian. I think even to a certain extent, even in Maharashtra, it doesn't happen, but you guys can correct me. I think we have a good chunk of Maharashtrian students also here. Okay, so generally you don't have marriage between relatives. Okay, it's something that is frowned upon. But however, within South Indian Hindu societies, you have certain kind of culture jahan pe certain kinds of cousin marriages can happen. We know, yes, cousin marriages can take place. Okay, there are certain kind of relations that can marry. For instance, there is maternal uncle and niece kind of marriage. Okay, uncle niece kind of marriage will take place, and cousin marriage also. It is not all cousin marriage. It has to be cross cousin marriage. Okay, so it is cross cousin marriage. Okay, and I'll explain what is cross cousin. Okay, so it is, let's say there is a girl. She cannot marry her mother's sister's son, right? She can only marry her mother's brother's son, right? Similarly, if there is a male, okay, the male cannot marry the mother's sister's daughter, right? It has to be the mother's opposite sex wala. So it should be the mother's brother's daughter. So this is basically what is allowed. So these kind of marriages are basically consanguineous. And why is it denoted slightly differently? See, generally when there are these sort of disorders or traits, now whenever it is a consanguineous kind of a marriage or relations ke andar marriage, that basically means there is a lot of similarity when it comes to the gene pool. Okay, so the chances of similar kind of alleles being present in the population is a lot higher. So you can look through it a little more in detail. Vinod says affected by recessive traits carrier. Okay, right. So you think of it like this. Okay, so we will call it heterozygous for recessive allele if it is, in this case, and we'll call it carrier if it is X-linked. Okay, just so that it is not confusing for you. Okay, so that is that. Okay. And then again, if they're separated, then how would you sort of denote it? If it's identical twin, non-identical twins, right? So we'll take a look at all of these. So a good example is going to be, let's say, just take a look at a pedigree chart. This is just a sample pedigree chart. So how many generations can you see here? You can see 4 different kind of generations. So what do you see here? This. Okay. Now, what does this mean? Okay, let's go back to this particular chart. And what do you see here? It is opposite sex, but they are not just siblings, they are basically non-identical twins. Okay, so and so on and so forth. You see a double line connecting these two. So what would this mean? This essentially highlights that there is some sort of a relation, consanguineous kind of a marriage that is taking place here. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now within this, I'm going to break this down into 4 different parts just to ensure that we can analyze each of these different kind of pedigrees for different sort of disorders, right, or different sort of traits. So I'm going to break this down into, if you look at your handout, you'll basically see there is autosomal dominance. Okay, we'll take a look at this. Then after that, we'll take a look at autosomal recessive. Again, we'll look at X-linked dominant, X-linked recessive. Okay, so that is that. Now, I have given you a few disorders. These are all examples. I've also given you what exactly the disorder is, right? So there are 4 blanks there in autosomal dominant inheritance. Please note it down. So within autosomal dominant inheritance, please write it down. First one, achondroplasia or dwarfism. Achondroplasia or dwarfism. Second blank, Huntington's chorea or Huntington's disease. Third one, brachydactyly. Okay, I'll tell you about each of these things and Marfan syndrome, so you can note these down. See, pehla wala that you see here, right? See, achondroplasia, also known as dwarfism, no? It is that there are certain kind of autosomal disorders or dominant disorders. Dominant essentially means what? Let's talk about first autosomal dominant, and then I'll tell you about these disorders. Okay, autosomal. What is autosomal? There are a total of 46 pairs of chromosomes, right? So within this, autosomal are those ones which is in the first 22 pairs. So if you have a problem in the first 22, so you can see this here. So what have I drawn here? You have 22 plus 23rd pair, right? So 22 pairs plus 23rd pair. Now, if you have any sort of a disorder on this end, you're going to call it what? Autosomal, right? It is going to be called autosomal, right? And if I say dominant, what does that mean? If it is going to be dominant, that basically means, let's say capital D is, it's coding for a particular disorder or a particular sort of a trait. If you have a lowercase d, that basically means you don't have that trait. But just by definition, if it is a dominant wala thing, what are the kind of genotypes that will carry the disorder? If you have a capital D affected. If you have a lowercase d, you have a lowercase d, you're not affected. Okay, so no disorder. But what if you have a capital D, lowercase d? What if you have a capital D, lowercase d? You have a problem wala allele also. At the same time, you have a no problem wala allele also. So what will it be? Will it be a disorder or will it not be a disorder? Will it be a disorder or will it not be a disorder? And why? And why? Carry. Okay, correct. So it is not going to be having that particular disorder primarily on account of, if anybody can basically link it to any of the topics that we have seen, because of that third wala law that we have seen of Mendel, right? Okay, because of the law of Mendel. Which was that law? Law of dominance and recessive. Okay, in which we basically saw that when you have a capital D, which denotes a dominant wala allele, it is going to dominate over the recessive allele. Okay, so dominant alleles are those that is going to express what the dominant is going to stand for, even in heterozygous condition. So even in heterozygous sort of a condition, okay, it is going to sort of code for your dominant wala disorder. So always remember that. So what are these disorders? I'll just tell you a little bit about each of these disorders. I've given you a little more detail. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to mention these examples. Okay, you have to remember these examples. Okay, see, achondroplasia mein, it's one of those sort of disorders jahan pe there is a limited range of motion at the elbows, a thoda sa larger kind of a head size, smaller fingers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is that kind of a disorder. Similarly, when it comes to Huntington's sort of a chorea, Huntington's disease also it is called, it is a neurodegenerative sort of a disease. Okay, so you'll have primarily involuntary sort of movements. You will see quite a bit of it. Okay, uncontrolled kind of movements. Okay, brachydactyly. Okay, shorter digits. Okay, very like disproportionately shorter fingers and toes. Okay, you will see something like those. Marfan syndrome. Okay, it's another sort of a syndrome that basically affects many different parts of the body. Okay, so affects the connective tissues. Okay, your blood vessels, bones. Okay, and many other things, hearts also, eyes also, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are all the sort of disorders. So these are all examples of what? Of your autosomal sort of dominant disorders, right? So I hope this is clear. So you have to understand what is dominant, what is autosomal, which I think you have. You have to understand what is dominant, which I think you have. Okay, Mendel's law. Shreya, correct. Okay, wonderful. Okay, and then now we are going to understand the inheritance pattern using what? Pedigree charts. Okay, so pedigree charts. So for this, I have basically already prepared a sample sort of a chart that you can take note of. But primarily, I want to train you to sort of draw these kind of charts in class. Okay, so that you don't have to mug up any sort of charts. You basically have to understand these charts. Okay, so first thing, let's take an example, whichever example of your choice. Okay, so anything is an example, right? So you can have achondroplasia, Huntington's disease, brachydactyly, Marfan syndrome, doesn't matter. Okay, anything that is autosomal dominant. Okay, so let me define very clearly here. If you have a capital D allele, what does that mean? It basically means that you're carrying that disorder wala, right? So it is the allele that carries that particular disorder. So that means if you have a lowercase d, what do you have? Do you have the problem or no? That particular allele is not going to have that. It is not going to code for that particular disorder. Now, so that means what? Okay, shall we talk about different kind of genotypes? Now you have three different kind of genotypes that you can have: genotype 1, genotype 2, genotype 3. Right? Genotype 1, 2, 3. Okay, have I drawn the right kind of symbols? And if yes or no, why? Why not? Take a second, go through your handout, and tell me if I've drawn the right kind of a symbol. Let's be extremely clear here. The stronger your concept is, never ever will you make a mistake when you draw a pedigree chart. It is correct. It is correct. Can you explain again? Okay. So, which part should I explain again? So, is it clear for all? Any questions here? So, is it right? All of you? Those of you who have been following, can you just tell me if it is right or wrong? Any issues here? Am I making any sort of mistake here? I want to ensure that your understanding is like crystal clear here. The capital D, lowercase d. Okay. So we'll talk about this. Okay, so take a look at this. So come back here. What did we say? If you want, you can just note this down also, right? So see, what is more important is the person affected or not? Okay, that is very important that you show. Okay, now let us say this person is unaffected. This person is affected. Very, very clear. Okay, now this I told you when you're carrying recessive wala thing, right? This represents capital D, lowercase d when it is a recessive, right? It is when it is recessive, right? This is dominant. So when it is dominant, the first question that you want to ask is the person affected or not? Is the person affected or not? The person is affected. So whether you carry lowercase d or not does not matter. And I'll tell you when we do a little bit of analysis, now in recessive, we tend to skip some generations. Okay, meaning you could have a particular disorder when your mother is not affected, your father is not affected. right? But yahan pe, so we'll come to that when you talk about recessive, okay? But here you want to show that a person is affected, not affected. The person is affected. So you're going to have these as your symbols. Now, can you try to draw a particular chart? Okay, maybe I'll walk you through the very first one. Okay, so let's take a look at this. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to try to mate a capital D lowercase d genotype with a lowercase t. Okay, now instead of saying capital D lowercase t, what should I say? A heterozygote, a heterozygous kind of a genotype with a homozygous recessive genotype in the very first generation. And second generation, I need to find again a heterozygous with a capital D, capital D. So homozygous for dominant one. Okay. So let's take a look at this. So we said that this is basically the symbols that we are going to have, right? So this is what we have. So this is okay. So let's take a look at this. So three generations we've got to find out. So the very first generation, what do? I need to have a capital D lowercase d. Okay. If I have a capital D lowercase d, okay, mating with a small d, okay. So a homozygous recessive, okay, genotype. So let me see if I can get this. Okay. So there you go. Okay, so let us say I have a capital D lowercase d mating with a lowercase d. So what could I have? In order to understand what kind of combinations I should get, I will basically use something called a Punnett square, which we have seen. Okay, my Punnett square. Okay, Punnett square. Okay, I think it's a Punnett or et jo bhi hai. Okay, Punnett square. Now, once I get my Punnett square, always remember when you're drawing these pedigree charts, now you always try to have to make it very simple. Try to have for the second generation and the third generation, try to ensure that you have four. Why so four? Because you're going to have four different boxes. We can basically fill it out, right? And the same thing you do for the next generation. Now, similarly, apart from having these four, also try to have two males and two females. Okay, two males and two females. Okay, and when you have this, it becomes very simple. So if I say if I'm going to have a capital D lowercase d mate with the lowercase t, what could be my combinations? Okay, let me just show you a little. Let me just do it live and then show you. Okay, so I am going to have, let us say, my female, right? So the female should be, actually my female should be on the left hand side. Okay, where should be the males? Male should be on top. So let me put a lowercase d on the left. Okay, and let me do a capital D lowercase d on the top. Now, what are the kind of combinations I'm going to have? I'm going to have a capital D lowercase d. I'm going to have a lowercase d, and then I'm going to have a capital D lowercase d here, and then I'm going to have a lowercase d. So these are my combinations. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take the very first one. Okay, put it here. I'm going to take my second one. I'm going to keep it here, and the third and the fourth, I'm going to keep it here. So now what do I have? Now I'm also supposed to show how are these persons affected. So if I have a capital D lowercase d, what do I have? Affected. If I have a capital D lowercase d female, what do I have? Affected. Okay, what do I have for lowercase d? Not affected, not affected. So does that make sense? So far you have actually gotten it here. I also just gave you an idea. What if you take a capital D lowercase d and sort of cross it with a capital D, capital D. Okay, now if you want to try it, please go ahead and try it. If not, I'll just show you for one more. Okay, so let's take a look at the second wala Punnett square. Okay, so I should have, what should I have on my, the top should be lowercase t because it's the male. Okay, because that is the protocol. And on the left hand side, I have the female, so it is going to be a capital lowercase d, and these are the combinations that I get. Okay, so if these are the combinations that I get, so I am going to have a capital D lowercase d and a capital D lowercase t. I'm going to have two unaffected wala things. Capital lowercase d should be affected, capital lowercase t should be affected, and so on and so forth. So what have you net gotten till here? What you have gotten till here is that you have actually drawn a pedigree chart, okay, for a autosomal dominant disorder. Is there anything that is missing here? So what is missing here? Perfect. Okay, so propositus. Okay, perfect. Okay, excellent. So it is the propositus, the proband, or the index case is basically what is missing in this example. So let us say that I just say, maybe this is the person who has come to the genetic counselor and said, hey, can you help me sort of like make a pedigree chart so that we can analyze for the disorder that I am currently carrying, which could be, let's say, achondroplasia. Okay, so that is basically what the person is getting affected with. Okay, so now that we have solved one, how about we solve another one? Okay, Autosomal dominant is something that we've seen. We'll try to solve for autosomal recessive. Now, this time, can you please help me sort of like break this down?